In this video, I'm going to talk about how to create your own dialogues and have them communicate with other forms in your application. As a refresher, dialogues are merely forms which communicate with the user. As an example, I've shown a screenshot from PowerPoint's Options dialog. This dialog allows configuration for certain options such as language or spell checking. Again, the job of this dialog is simply to gather information from the user and to use that information to make adjustments to the GUI application. There are other types of dialogs that don't necessarily collect information, rather they simply communicate information to the user. An example would be the About dialog box for Internet Explorer. The simplest dialog that can be created is by using a class, MessageBox, and by calling its static show method. Here's an example statement. And as you can see here, we call the show method with 3 parameters. The first parameter is to set the text inside the dialog box. The second parameter sets the text for the title bar. The third parameter controls what types of buttons appear on our dialog. With just one call to this static method show of class MessageBox, we can create very simple modal dialog boxes. What's a modal dialog and what's a modeless dialog? Modal dialogs are so called because of the mode which they place applications into when they appear. When the modal dialog appears, you have to close it first before you can interact with the main form again. In our sample app, notice that the form in the background has its title bar grayed out. This indicates it is inaccessible until the dialog box closes. Modeless dialogs, on the other hand, allow you to interact with the parent form even while it's still open. Dialogs are forms, but there are certain properties that you can set to make it look and feel consistent with other dialogs from other applications across the Windows operating system. There are 7 properties in total that you can set. The form border style has to be set to fixed dialog because dialogs cannot be resized. Again, it's a property that you have to set to make it have a feel and look consistent with other dialogs. A dialog has no maximize box and no minimize button, so setting both of these properties to false is necessary as well. When you show a dialog, you can choose to either show it in the center of the screen or centered on its parent form. So you can set its start position property to either center screen or center parent. Dialogs don't appear in the taskbar, and there's actually a very good reason for this. Applications, standalone applications, appear in the taskbar. Dialogs aren't applications, they're merely windows that are part of another application. So it doesn't make sense for them to have their own icon on the taskbar. A form's accept button is the button that gets clicked when the user hits the enter key. The cancel button is the button that gets activated when the user presses the escape key. Form dialog communication is very simple to create. Keep in mind that a dialog is simply a special kind of form represented in memory and in our program by a class. If we want to store information collected by the dialog, we can add fields and properties to the dialog class. Here's an example. The dialog box is, of course, the front window, aptly titled Test Dialog, and it simply collects your first name and last name. Now let's look at the code for this class. Here we have part of the code for our test dialog class. While I don't show the entire class's code, the private fields and the public properties are shown, albeit I collapsed the public properties so that I could save space. We can store the data collected from users into the private fields, and the dialog can provide access to the fields for other forms to use via the public properties. On a side note, the form that creates the dialog is called the parent form, and the dialog that gets shown is the child form. We briefly mentioned this a few minutes earlier. Every form has an accept button and a cancel button property, which you should set to make your form look like a dialog. The accept button's click event handler will be called when you hit the return key, and the cancel button's event handler will be called when you press escape. Going back to our previous test dialog example, we've set the accept button to the confirm button on our form, and the cancel button to the cancel button on our form. Button controls have a dialog result property which you can set. Now when you set this property, the form also has a dialog result property, and it will get set automatically to the same value as well. The parent form can then access the dialog's dialog result and determine how to act accordingly. Now let's break this down first. Here we have the event handler for our confirm button in test dialog. We set the button's dialog result to dialog result.ok. Now this will cause two things to happen. The first is the dialog result for test dialog will automatically also be set to the OK. Second, the dialog will then be hidden and control will return to the parent form. Now let's see how the parent form uses the dialog result property. We start off by creating a dialog object and calling its showDialog method to display it on screen. Our next step is to obtain the dialog's dialog result and save it in a variable. We can then use an if-else chain to test the value of the dialog result and act accordingly. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you have any questions and/or comments, feel free to contact me at sparkprogrammer@gmail.com or my secondary email at concord.spark.tutor@gmail.com.